So the little spring that keeps the seal particularly tight from the differential on the inside CV joint, the spring has fallen off. This seal in here has a hard life because when you're putting the axle in, it's pretty easy to actually set the axle shaft down on this seal before you're starting to be engaged on the metal. And also when you're pulling it out, the shaft has the opportunity to drop down on the seal once it's not supported internally anymore. So we're just going to keep an eye on that and see if it's leaking. I'll also add a little bit of grease on here, and this C-clip, if the open part is hanging down, then there's more opportunity for this clip to get caught as it re-engages. So we're going to put this in with the split part of the clip pointing up. And I'm also going to just put a little bit of grease on here, and hopefully the seal cooperates and stays put as we slide all this in. And there we go. We're in. We're going back together. Okay. As we start going back together, you'll notice this little brass ring in here. It stayed with the bearings this time. Sometimes it stays on the CV shaft as we slide all this out. If you're disassembling this further, take a photo of which way this faces, because it's an important little oil-soaked thrust washer thing that would be easy for it to be out of place. This is the ugly part of the job. I think trying not to get too much dirt in your wheel bearings and on your CV shaft there. And boom, we're in. And this would be the nice time to have a big block or something underneath to keep all this up. Because this is now ugly. By putting in this little screw in the front, I've got the lower ball joint hanging on that. The problem is that we need to get all these bolts through into the lower ball joint. And you know, it's the front ones, particularly the back front one here, which is really tricky. And I may actually have to drop all this back down again. There just isn't enough room, I think. And this is when it would be nice if we didn't have this whole wheel bearing assembly, rotor, etc. on the front. So by pulling the upper ball joint out, this gave us the room we needed underneath the CV axle to get those bolts in. Now Now that we've got all those in, now we just need to wiggle this ball joint underneath. And if we didn't have this little book right here holding this upper control arm, it would not be possible to just shove that underneath. There just isn't enough freedom in the system. Now we're just going to get the upper ball joint threaded in. That's good. As you're putting this upper ball joint back in, I mean, it would definitely help if I had another jack and I could just push all this up hard. The danger here is that it'd be really easy to cross thread into this. Because there's nothing controlling the angle of this, obviously. And if it's new, they're extremely stiff. So I ended up having to cut a little board to push the lower control arm up. One thing to keep in mind is that the sway bar here is trying to keep the lower control arms at the same vertical height. So in order to push the lower control arm up, you're actually engaging the sway bar and twisting this big steel beam. So another thing a person could do on this is you remove your shields and unbolt the sway bar bushings, at which point this lower control arm would be much easier to push up and down. We had hoped to use this C-clamp on the CV boot, on the inner side, just right here behind the shock absorber, but it was threatening to cut the boot, and it fell off anyway. So I've just replaced it with a zip tie, which is, I think, good enough. You know, the clamp on the outside of the boot, the big clamp, is actually doing real work, whereas the inner one doesn't do much of anything besides perhaps keep a bit of water out. So now we're reassembling. We're just going to put on this big brake bracket thing. Assuming I can figure out which way it goes. You know what I like about these Delicas, I find they really, as long as the hardware is in good condition and you're not breaking every second bolt, they seem to have pretty good quality metal in my opinion. They really unbolt pretty easy. They don't require a whole ton of specialized tools. Although it is nicer with impacts and cordless ratchets. So we travel with an old set of brake pads and a rebuild kit for the calipers. Is what happens with these the brake calipers, typically you get a little bit of corrosion in on the pistons and the piston seals, and these start to seize and they lock on. And start to burn up your brake pads, and you'll just have one rotor that's running really, really hot. So this gives me enough rubber to be able to change the seals on the pistons. And I've also got a couple pistons with me as well. one for the back and one for the front, so in case the piston is in really bad shape. You know, the brake calipers on the front of these, you can get rebuilt ones reasonably cheap in Canada, but the rear ones, to get exactly that one with the right diameter of piston, it's just not available. So I just rebuild. Ideally, I would have a little caliper or the slide lube with me, silicone grease, but I don't, so we're just putting it back together. Oops, solid steel one on the top. Just word to the wise, if you are putting these in with the correct lube, don't overfill them. I made the mistake early in my days of fooling around with Delicas to think that I should just fill this whole chamber full of grease. And what ended up happening is the bolts, these slide pins, hydro-locked on it and twisted up the caliper and caused a bunch of brake heating. So you only need a little bit. Done with that. And reattach this ABS sensor line. Wow, that doesn't want to latch. Be nice to have a bit of anti-seize to put on these, but I don't. Now you're not going to be able to tighten these until the van's back down on the ground, same as your wheel nuts, so don't forget. Good. Normally, there's a little thin washer behind here, and it seems to have walked off. And normally the snap ring is in good enough shape that you can't just push it on by hand. But I'm okay with less fight today. Nope, not on. So this one seems to have an issue with this snap ring, and this shaft from the CV is just running a little bit too far in, so our snap ring here can't fully engage. And our van in Mexico actually has the same issue on the other side, that it just really, it should be out another millimeter, and it's not. And on that one, I just ground this snap ring down to be a little bit thinner, and away we go. And when I took that van apart for the first time, the snap ring wasn't even engaged at all. It had completely fallen off. So we're just gonna tap the cap on this and put the wheel on and call it a day. Ideally, you'd have a rubber mallet to do that.